we have leaned into that in a way that other networks are leaning away from.
Well, hello. Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, founder and podcast producer at MaxPodcasting, and you can email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode B152's Rock Lobster, and today's guest is Deirdre Lester. Deirdre is the Chief Revenue Officer, aka CRO, I know it's a lot of acronyms back to back, CRO of Barstool Sports. She has been instrumental in leading Barstool's crazy growth, some would say wild business growth, in recent years. And previous stops in her career include ESPN, Yahoo, the MLB, and CNET. She's been named one of the 25 most powerful women in sports by Forbes. And in this episode, we talked how exactly Barstool has achieved so much growth, what goes on behind the scenes at Barstool, what it's like to work there, and some of Deirdre's favorite parts of working in the sports business world. By the way, this episode was recorded at the Barstool headquarters in New York, which was pretty much the coolest thing ever. So big thank you to Deirdre, to Sarah, to Steve, to everybody who made it happen. Crazy cool experience. Awesome interview. It is the delightful Deirdre Lester. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Deirdre Lester, the Chief Revenue Officer of Barstool Sports. Deirdre, we connected couple years ago at Podcast Movement. Saw you up on stage. Really informational session. Lots of learnings from that. All the way full circle today at the Barstool office. How you doing today? Thanks for joining.
Yeah. Hey, Max. Great to be here on your podcast. Thanks for inviting me. And so glad we could do it in person. You know, it's been a long year of virtual events, panels, podcast interviews. So nice to have a face-to-face conversation with you on your show.
Absolutely. I'm super honored. I mean, I hang out here at the Barstool office all the time. It's kind of where I live now. But no, this is actually my first recording in person since, I believe, the tail end of December 2019. So I feel like this is a good way to kind of end that streak.
Yeah, same here. I think the only other in-person interview I've done this year was Erica's podcast down the hall in her office. So this is actually my first time interviewing from the Barstool podcast studio. So welcome to our studios too. Perfect.
Again, I live here, so it's okay. But we're going to get into a lot of cool stuff about growing Barstool, what you've done, how you've been instrumental to the growth of Barstool, and what you've done before that. But before we get into that, we have a pretty cool thing in common. Westfield, New Jersey.
My hometown.
Yeah. How much of your childhood did you actually spend in Westfield?
You know, in and around that area for the most part, my entire childhood. So I grew up in Fanwood, Scotch Plains, Westfield, went to Union Catholic in Scotch Plains. So like that whole area is still home base for some of my family and a lot of my old friends, and a place I hold near and dear.
Very near and dear here as well, just to rhyme it. I actually went to Westfield pretty much every year growing up from Ohio. Naturally, Westfield ties, right? No, my cousins, shout out the Zuckers, grew up in Westfield, and Uncle Cliff and Lori still live there to this day. And their close family friend turned out to be the Gottdieners, and their daughter, Dana Gottdiener, is my girlfriend. So
cool.
Very small world, lots and lots of Westfield ties. This is the Westfield edition of the Wild Business Growth Podcast.
I love it.
When you think back to that time in growing up, did you have any inkling, just to use the word inkling, that sports would become such a huge part of your business career?
None at all. No. You know, I did grow up playing a lot of sports, grew up in a family that was super athletic. I have two brothers, one older, one younger. We're all very competitive. We're very competitive with one another. My father was constantly running, half marathons and pulling us along to come run the 5K or the fun run mile. So, we did all of that. And yet that was not anything that really I ever thought would translate into a career of any kind. I didn't actually chase sports as my career. In fact, so many people ask me that question just because it is hard to break into the industry because it is so popular, because everyone who played sports or is a huge fan of professional and college sports would like to find a way in some way, shape, or form. Because of that, it's competitive and it's challenging. And it wasn't something I sought out to do. I did seek out advertising and marketing and found my way into a sports career through that. But no, growing up, this wasn't something I kind of dreamed of or aspired to really in any way.
You mentioned that your dad ran half marathons and marathons frequently. How frequently are you talking? Because I'm so exhausted just from thinking. I don't know what's more tiring, watching the home run derby or thinking about marathons. But.
Well, the home run derby is tiring because they started at 8 p.m. and you're up until the wee hours watching it if you can stay up that late. In fact, little aside, I worked at Major League Baseball, so I feel like I can give them a little critique. But as someone who has 12 and 9-year-old boys that wanted to stay up and watch it, it was a shame to have to put them to bed before the final round. That's something the league should look at in terms of growing young fans. But yeah, the running thing, that's something that, we all kind of had as a big part of our lives. And I wish that I had the endurance that my father had. He ran marathons and half marathons almost every year I can remember growing up. I've done a handful myself, but didn't really stick with it for too long.
Yeah, a handful of marathons is nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, no, it isn't. It's great.
Nowhere near as ashamed as like a late start to a home run. No, I'm just kidding. But you loved sports growing up, didn't quite know that you'd be headed in that direction from a career standpoint. I know that you studied English Lit, some Spanish in college, which again could apply to the sports world. Maybe if you're like writing biographies or memoirs in the sports world.
Well, that is actually, it's funny because I did aspire to writing, and that was something that I wanted to do. And part of the reason I studied English literature in college is I love to read, and I did a lot of writing and studying biographies and autobiographies. So maybe one day I'll get into that again. But, it does translate, being able to, you learn a lot about communications in that major. And this is obviously a form of communications in every way. And then I think I heard in one of your episodes of your show that I had listened to that you studied abroad in London. Is that right?
I did. Yes. That's why I'm really good at English.
I think cultural experiences is something that, as someone who grew up on the Northeast, New Jersey, New York, and went to school in Vermont, I was really craving a new environment. And so I studied abroad in Spanish. So, having studied the language in the U.S., one of the things that I'll always find perplexing is that you can study a foreign language all through elementary, grammar school, high school, and college in the United States and really not be able to speak a word of it when you show up on the ground in whatever country. So studying abroad in Spain was like a very fun cultural experience and also really eye-opening to kind of how Americans are so close to their own culture. And that was something that I did that helped me kind of broaden my horizons and interest in other cultures and ways of life. And I actually lived in London for 3 years, not that long ago, actually, and found that to be incredibly fascinating, going back and living in Europe as not a young student, but as a now, professional parent, career person. So
I'm a huge London fan, obviously. On a Spanish note as well, what is the biggest thing that you think opened your eyes about living and studying abroad?
Yeah, I think just frankly, how unique each culture, I think Europe is particularly this way, but how unique from country to country each culture is. I mean, we have some version of that here in the US where, the Southeast is very different than the Northeast and the West Coast and the Midwest, but everything still is kind of, in a way, somewhat homogenized in the United States. And there, it's not as much. It's also changed so much. I mean, when I studied abroad in Spain, I was in the south of Spain, in Granada, and traveled all over Spain, but predominantly southern Spain, where like the culture was still very traditional and very not Americanized. And then I go back, more than a decade later with my family, and there's a Starbucks on every corner in Seville and Granada and Madrid. And I just found that almost like disappointing to see, even though I'm sure everyone in Spain loves their Starbucks like we do here. It just was such a dramatic change to see that.
It is. And that's actually, I think that's my favorite part about going to Europe too, is like in a plane ride of half an hour, like you could experience such a completely different culture, like different food and different Starbucks locations.
Yeah. And I mean, the world has changed so much now. I mean, not to date myself, but, when I was in college, we weren't really on the internet. We weren't, there wasn't access to everything and every culture and every kind of food and every kind of, cultural moment and event, and sporting events, we weren't broadcasting Premier League in the US at the time, so a lot has changed since then. And so I'd say open your mind up to new ways of life, new cultures, and just exploring that was for me really exciting at that college age. Again, going back as an adult, a little bit different, but still like getting out of, your comfort zone is something that we should all do in our lives, in our careers. One of the ways doing that, obviously, is in a major way is travel. And right now that's challenging. People are trying to get back out and travel. People are trying to come here and travel. And that's not an easy thing to do. But everybody, I think that you're seeing this pent up demand and energy for it, which I'm very excited about.
Let's get out of your comfort zone and get into sports business, which is very much in your comfort zone. When you look at kind of the first stops of sports business in your career, I mean, you spent some time at ESPN, you spent some time at Rivals, which I have like very fond memories in high school of looking at like the top basketball recruits committing to Indiana, and then probably at a certain point decommitting from Indiana and then recommitting on Rivals. It was really, really cool stuff. And same thing from the college football standpoint, but really, really great nostalgia about Rivals. You have CNET in there as well. From some of those stops that you had and your exposure to sports, the business of sports, what did you learn that kind of got you hooked of, ooh, I could actually have a career in this space?
So I stumbled into sports, as I mentioned. I fortunately, after school, after college, with a few short stops in between, landed at CNET.com at the early days of the internet growth, early days of internet advertising even being a viable medium, and at a very highly entrepreneurial place. So I know this podcast is all about entrepreneurs. I worked for Halsey Minor and Shelby Bonnie, who were two of the biggest pioneers in the late 90s and early 2000s of the internet business overall as a way to deliver content to consumers, and then also as a way for marketers to reach those consumers in unique ways. And so it was a very exciting business to be part of because we were evangelists. So I've sold advertising in a lot of different places in my careers. That stopped there. I learned the business in a way that was like there had been no one before that had done it. So we were pioneering. We had to kind of write the playbook. We had to hold hands with our advertisers and really get them to trust us. We had to do that in a way that didn't diminish from what they had been doing in the past, which in the days of CNET was a lot of print advertising, really. After doing that for almost 5 years and being part of a huge growth story there, I got a call from a recruiter about an opportunity to come work at ESPN.com. And really at the time, if you look back in 2003, whatever, I think that's the year it was, there wasn't a lot of sports media players doing anything meaningful on the internet. There was ESPN.com and there was CBSSportsline.com. And we were sort of head-to-head competitors in the space, and it was really fun to be a part of. I went there because, one, I had been at CNET 5 years, and as a first stop in your career, good amount of time to get established, but also, it was all tech talk all the time, and I was excited to kind of learn new mediums on the marketing side, learn, from television to print with having that core and online, and then also to talk to marketers from different categories and genres than really tech and B2B tech. So, one of my first clients that I was assigned to go after at CNET was Nextel, which eventually became Sprint. Worked with Dr. Pepper and just getting into new consumer goods categories, business services categories, financial services, called on Bank of America. It's just like a very broadening experience for me, stepping into sports. And then one of the things that I really thought was exciting and also fun about sports was once you get into sports and you're talking about sports all the time, you start consuming more sports. You learn more about the sports that maybe you're not as big of a fan of as others, especially ESPN, where we covered everything for the most part. I was at the time, going to a lot of Knicks games and was a big NBA fan. But then, I didn't know as much about hockey, or when we took on the NASCAR rights, I didn't know anything and had to learn everything because my big client, Nextel Sprint, became the naming rights partner there. So there's always more to learn in sports. And there's the diehard sports people that want to work in sports because that's all they think about. It's what they live, breathe, and talk about all the time. Max, you might be one of those people. I don't know. But,
yeah, I'm actually a part-time NASCAR driver. So this is spot on.
You're quoting in our prep session, quoting Big Cat and the PMT guys. So I know you're listening. But for me, it was just like, everyone, you go to marketers, not everybody's a fan of sports. Not everybody is as invested in the sports that they are investing in from a marketing perspective. But everybody knows somebody that's a maniacal sports fan. Everybody can relate to sports fans and their passion, and why, from a communication standpoint, marketing to sports fans is one of the most impactful ways to reach and influence a consumer. And that's something that I learned very early at ESPN, and I've seen all throughout the different sports media outlets that I've been at. You mentioned, rivals.com, which, be curious how you get your recruiting news today, if you're still following Rivals or if you have found other outlets to do that. But Rivals was like a pretty massive but niche community of diehard college sports fans that follow it to a level that, I hadn't been as familiar with when I went in there. And once I saw how deeply invested the fan bases were in the recruiting, the ranking of players and following them from their high school careers into their college careers in football, basketball, and even beyond that, other sports, that was really eye-opening for me. And seeing that now in other sports as well is something that I think the internet has really allowed for that. I mean, when I went to rivals.com, the medium was essentially premium message boards. There was nothing sexy about them from a design, look, and feel. I mean, shout out Shannon Terry. You'd hate to hear me say that, but the tech and the functionality of it was pretty innovative and ahead of its curve. But the way you experienced it as a consumer was really, you paid to have access to their recruiting experts and their knowledge, and their being, on the inside essentially. And that was really different. I mean, you hear now everybody in the internet industry trying to figure out what's their paid subscription model. And Rivals was one of the companies that invented that. And that was quite some time ago. So I feel like everywhere I've gone in sports, it's been iterative in terms of what I've learned. And that only continues to evolve as the internet business continues to shift and change.
Well, to answer your question, I'm not nearly as obsessive over recruiting news as I used to be.
Oh, no.
To your point on everybody knows a sports maniac, I grew up, my dad kind of describe himself and introduce himself to people, or like in his bio online, as a sports nut. My household growing up, actually, my dad was so much of a sports nut that we had 3 TVs in our living room. And this was, 20 years ago. So like growing up, and my mom can watch whatever on the main screen, and we'd always have games on the side screen, or NFL Sunday with Sunday Ticket. You got like everything going at the same time. But there's something about sports in that it turns people into maniacs, but also that there's so much positive and so much excitement that comes out of it. It's like the only thing I've ever seen that has made me like jump in my dad's arms. Like literally he caught me after LeBron hit the shot versus the Magic. It just makes you do crazy things.
Yeah. And I do think too, like for the most part, sports as a genre from a content standpoint, and then for someone who's working in the monetization side of it and the partnership side of it, it's largely positive regardless of what's going on outside of sports, whether the economy's on a high or a low swing. what's going on in world politics and national and even local politics. Like, sports is people's release from all the other stuff going on in their lives and in and around the world. It's not always as light, and some sports media companies love to politicize sports. But, I think in general, over the time I've been fortunate enough to work in the sports business, I have found it as a refreshing release from all the other noise in like news outlets and things like that. And then I also have found that like at certain times in your life, like you need sports, you crave sports. A big sports moment for me that was like very amazingly memorable and brought some levity to a very difficult time was, the World Series post 9/11 in New York. And so I think that, sports is something that people just really gravitate to for, a positive experience and they're passionate about. And I think, again, that's why when you're pulling a sponsorship in or a partner into a sports environment and you can connect them to the fans in authentic ways, you can really move the needle for their brand, for their business.
So speaking of sports, let's get to Barstool Sports. See what I did there? That was like the best one I got. Barstool Sports, you've been, I think, officially since 2018, correct? Been the chief revenue officer.
Yes, exactly.
Over your time, you've kind of overseen the revenue, I don't know if you say sales side or revenue kind of partnerships, sponsorships, things in that ballpark, just to use another sports pun. But I know that revenue from the time you've gotten here to, current day as we're recording this has gone from kind of lower double-digit millions to triple-digit millions, which, first of all, congrats, because that's
Thank you.
Not bad. It's okay.
Proud of it.
But really, really just such an incredible things that you've done and the team has done and so much to talk about. Getting you to Barstool in the first place, had you heard a lot about Barstool like before you kind of started interviewing here? What did that side of things look like?
Couple ways I knew Barstool. One, I've worked in the digital media landscape for the majority of my career and predominantly in sports. So I'm always following who are the up and comers, who are the startups, challenger brands, and who's rising from being startup to actually kind of starting to have some mainstream legitimacy and awareness. And Barstool was very much that when I was looking at Barstool in all for the duration of 2017 and having met Erica and talked to her just on the business side, really looking at even some of the back end analytics. Anyone can kind of get into Google Analytics and see the engagement that this brand has relative to competitors. Blew my mind seeing that. Then secondly, hearing a lot of anecdotally friends, family. Like I grew up in New Jersey. New Jersey's very much Barstool country, despite this being a Boston-born brand. My husband's from Boston. I went to University of Vermont. A lot of friends up those parts, and people really identified with Barstool in a way there. But then I was also, working my previous company, and I was out in LA and people were talking about Barstool. I'm like, wow, this brand is not just a Boston brand. It's really traveled nationwide, and the people who love it are kind of obsessed with it. And that was what really struck me. I was working at a company where I was running a partnerships team. Everyone, not dissimilar to Barstool, was sort of younger, millennial aged sales and marketing professionals rising in their careers. And what I found was that the chatter when you went out to happy hour or during the, breaks in work in the office was Barstool, or following some of your coworkers on Instagram. I was finding they were posting kind of Barstool isms. Saturdays for the boys was something I was keen to not because I was following Barstool so closely, but because the people I was working with were. And so I saw it in a lot of facets of my life, and that struck me. And then once I started talking to people about it, both in the industry and then also just friends to think about the brand and my interest in coming here, it struck me that everyone I know from like the mid-40s age group down to college was very aware of the Barstool brand, and a lot of them very passionate about it. And that really struck me. I didn't see a lot of other digital media companies or even media companies that had that much passionate brand affinity.
Yeah, and you use the word obsessed in a good way. Like I haven't seen many other companies, if any, or brands that have generated such an obsessed, like we're tossing around words like obsessed, maniacal,
Passionate,
Like there's
in a positive way,
passionate
for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, there's just some serious magic to it, to have something that people are so passionate about, and literally will everything from buying merchandise to just tuning into podcasts like every single hour of the week, to engaging in live events. Like there's just so many different ways to interact with the brand.
Yeah, and that was a big part of my coming here as well. I mean, at the time, again, thinking back to like 2016, 2017, what was going on in the digital media landscape, a lot of the mid-tier brands out there, I'm not going to name them, but there's a lot of consolidation happening in our space, in terms of brands that are in that anywhere from $50 to $200 million revenue range. They don't have that. You don't see people walking down the street wearing their hat, their t-shirt, putting their sticker on their bumper sticker of their car. That was something that I started paying attention to and noticing a lot with Barstool. The other thing that was happening is everyone was talking about, okay, can't just be relying on ad revenue as a business model. And everyone was talking about, how do you diversify your revenues? Is it through subscriptions? Is it through e-commerce? Do we become a producer of content for some of the bigger platforms that maybe have mass audiences and great tech and targeting capabilities, but don't have the chops to produce content, and the big content houses don't know how to produce for a Snapchat or, a Facebook, video platform. So everyone was thinking about that in the industry. My previous company, Whistle Sports, was talking about that a lot and figuring that out, and everyone else in the space, from Vice, Refinery 29, et cetera. And I came here and started talking with Erica and learning about the business here and kind of getting a sneak peek under the hood. And I was blown away by the existing scale of the ad business, and the potential of it, obviously, and then the e-commerce business closely rivaling that. I thought that was really impressive, and I think it spoke volumes about the affinity this fan base has for this brand. They want to wear it like they're part of the community, part of a club, and they want their friends and family to know they're part of the Barstool fan community. And that's really something, you see it with sports teams, and you see it with some sports leagues that are more niche, but really not with just like pure media brands.
Yeah, the amount of, pardon my take, references that I've mentioned to like my parents. I mean, my girlfriend Dana is hooked on Guys on Chicks. So that's like, that was always her favorite part.
Yeah, that's their sneaky way of getting the girlfriends.
Exactly.
Now their husbands and boyfriends don't get in trouble for listening for 5 hours a week to Pardon My Take.
Exactly. It's that, and then next thing you know, like we going on a long road trip and we're just like binging Pardon My Take the entire thing. So not just Guys on Chicks. When you think back to when you were hired, I don't know if it was Erica or the investors or who's kind of responsible for kind of laying the groundwork like this, but what were you kind of tasked with, or what did they want you to really achieve in your role as CRO?
First of all, just, Erica was the person who sought me out. I think she and I have some mutual connections in the industry, and we'd been introduced, and then she pursued me for this role. But I was also very excited the fact that the Chernin Group were the primary investor in Barstool, and that Barstool wasn't over leveraged from an investor standpoint, that they had one primary investor who are known to be really great and really good to work with, and reasonable to work with, and that like everything they touch seems to turn to gold. So that helps. You had the brand itself, and my interest in the Barstool brand and just like the fun of it all. And then you had Erica, who was already she'd been here a year's time when I came in and had already done some really big things with the brand. And then you had Chernin Group, which was exciting to see that they had come in such a meaningful way. I was tasked with scale revenue, find the ways that we're going to bring in more advertising revenue, find the ways to bring in more brand advertisers. We had predominantly a very strong base of direct response, or what people like to call now D2C consumer.
Oh, there we go.
The disruptor brands.
We need to we'll edit in like a counter for buzzwords in the sponsor space.
Yes. And we work with a lot of those brands still to this day in more meaningful ways than ever before. So I love them. And we kind of are scaling in both directions, which is like be more performance oriented, find more disruptor brands and performance brands to work with them. They just have a different DNA, and they talk differently, they buy differently. And so we actually have a separate team that services that type of business, and then bring on more blue chip brand advertisers, more established brand advertisers, go bring on, more national sponsors that do, work across all of things Barstool. And then as the franchises, some of our marquee franchises become, large entities unto themselves, find them their own brand sponsors. So, we're sitting here in a room where Body Armor's on the table. They're our water partner. They're in all of our podcast studios. They have refrigerators all over our offices, both here in New York, Chicago, and some of our remote folks have it in their home offices as well. And they're just become synonymous and ubiquitous with all things Barstool. Then there is within the individual franchises, maybe particular sponsors. So if we're sitting in the Pardon My Take studio, which is right next door, their beer sponsor, the official beer of Pardon My Take, is Coors Light. Coors is sort of all over their studio, in their hands, in their environment, and they have all sorts of ways they integrate that brand into their shows and their show and their content. And we do that across our different franchises. So it was really taking it from a low 8-figure business to a much larger 9-figure business now is what we're aiming for. And there's a variety of different ways we are doing that. And another is, and I wasn't really tasked with this initially, but it's something that's come about in kind of more of the last 2 years that I've been here, is identifying partners that we can create more robust relationships with beyond just the sponsorship piece of it. So if you think about our partnership with E&J Gallo and how we've taken, Pink Whitney and created something together with a partner and co-marketed it and really are fully invested in the success of that brand. That's unique. Again, not a lot of media outlets are doing that, if any, to that scale. And that's something we are looking at more opportunities to do that with our partners.
We might need to record part 2 of this in the Pardon My Take studio. I'm sure that won't be a problem, right?
Yeah,
we'll just
throw those guys out, tell them we've more important things to do.
Exactly. Whoops. Wrong room. I'm sure yeah. Pink Whitney is a shining pink example. And I know you were instrumental in that. It's really cool. I know it's like really, really taken off from a, what's the word? Consumption. I guess it's literally consumption standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, it is literally the number one flavored vodka in North America, both the US and Canada. And we're really looking beyond the category of flavored vodkas now and shooting for the moon to become the number one shot brand in both of those markets as well. And in a lot of ways, we're starting to see that take hold. So there's a different set of competitors when you're comparing yourself to flavored vodka versus shots. And, look, it's when we partner with someone on that level, you learn a lot about their business as much as our own. And so I've become a sort of mini expert on the spirits marketing business and their whole industry, as we've just been breaking so many boundaries that each couple of months we have to reset what we're setting our sights on there.
How did that go down? How do you get with E.J. Gallo, New Amsterdam, and are like, hey, we have an idea for a new flavor, a new product for you?
I think it was an aha moment across the board for a lot of the folks involved. And I had been working with the brand management team for New Amsterdam Vodka, and we brought them in as the official vodka of Barstool Sports. That is the first brand that came in that kind of traditional sports sponsorship type of program with us, right? We'd never had an official really anything here at Barstool in terms of the way we co-market the brand or license our IP. Again, that's a little bit of like my background coming from Major League Baseball, married with my background in digital media. And we started to put, me and my team that I put together, who come from both of those places, a lot of them started to put together those types of deals. NAV, New Amsterdam, as we call them, NAV sometimes, a little acronym. When they came on, one of the things they were also doing, and they clued us in on, was they were also becoming the official vodka of the NHL. And so it just became a natural fit to say, well, then you should put, I'll walk you around. They have a nice big bar in our headquarters here when we were moving in. They really helped invest in this space. And then they obviously jumped in as the presenting sponsor of Spit and Chiclets. And they have remained the presenting sponsor of Spit and Chiclets now for a number of years. But then the Pink Whitney brand was born out of like the creativity of the Chiclets talking about how they drink New Amsterdam vodka, and Whitney talking about how he drinks vodka with pink lemonade. The fans started sending us hundreds and hundreds of posts of New Amsterdam vodka and pink lemonade. And these were like rec league hockey guys and just Chiclets fans, sending us UGC. The Chiclets, if you hear them tell the story, they talk about how they were like, whoa, maybe we should actually make a drink like this. The Gallo folks at the same time were experimenting with new vodka flavors. They had just launched, I think, New Amsterdam Peach very successfully and thought, well, pink lemonade could be a nice natural next step for us. Perhaps we do this in partnership with you. So it came together really organically. It was, right partner at the right time, but a lot of just all in investment. I mean, we talk with them every other week practically about how do we push this brand forward, and the talent are on those calls thinking of ways to do that. So really unique partnership where the talent are invested, the partner is invested, we are invested in the long-term growth of that brand.
I think on the content side, it's such like a beautiful loop or cyclical, I'll just call it a loop, that you have of, you could be like in the Pink Whitney example, Spit and Chiclets guys were talking about something, and then it's actually like from the content, from the ideas that are kind of thrown around or even like goofed off on the show, can create actual sponsorship opportunities and product ideas. And I think that's so cool. And it's obviously Barstool has invested in podcasting and kind of newer forms of content so much, like over the top, and so many top rated podcasts out there. That's kind of one chunk of it. But when you go back to your, I guess, number one goal of scaling revenue for Barstool, are there kind of some buckets or a few key areas that, looking back now in the past few years, have been completely instrumental on actually achieving that and scaling that revenue?
Yeah, I think the way we looked at how we were monetizing podcasting was pretty critical early on. Again, when I came in, predominantly direct response advertising, and on the digital.com side, programmatic advertising, really living, and that's still very much there, display ads and whatnot. Podcasting is having this meteoric growth overall. That's why we're here, right, Max? So
exactly.
And then Barstool emerged as one of the top 10 consistently podcast networks in the U.S.
With MaxPodcasting being number 11, but no, I'm just kidding.
And so, we kind of took a critical look at the way it was being monetized and the brands that were coming in and sponsoring podcasts. And how they were valuing those audiences and that content and the integration there, and what made Barstool unique from the rest of the other players in the top 10. So the iHeartMedias of the world, the Wonderies of the world, et cetera. What we found a model that works for us that is really different than what I think a lot of the other top tier players are gunning towards. So they've all been trying to figure out how to make it easy, turnkey, scalable, targetable, basically how to make programmatic advertising work in podcasting, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and we'll start to do some more of that as well. But where they didn't want to go and where we've really leaned in is into the live read, host endorsed, read during the actual recording of the podcast, ad read in an organic way, narratizing the brands, if that's a word.
It is.
I think it is.
It is now.
It is now. I think Erica made it up, but I'm going to run with it. Narratizing brands into our content in a way that makes the brands synonymous with the franchise, synonymous with the personalities, and the people listening to those shows love those personalities and the endorsement that they give to the products. We have leaned into that in a way that other networks are leaning away from, because you know what? It's high touch. It's heavy lift. How do we figure out? And it comes with a lot of human error. I mean, we still have moments where, I'll be listening on my way in to a podcast that was, dropped at midnight last night, and I hear the ad read and I'm like, oh, they weren't supposed to mention their competitor because they're just riffing and they're it's supposed to be 60 seconds and sometimes it's 59, and somebody calls us and is like, you're 1 second short. That does happen, believe it or not. And
oh my God.
There's also the times where the ad read is going on for 6 minutes because it becomes a story, and the talent that are good at that, they just drive so much results for the advertisers. And the fans love the way they do it. And you'll even see comments on the show, not only about who was the great, professional athlete or celebrity that came on to Chicks in the Office or KFC Radio, but like if you watch Kevin Clancy on 1 Minute Man, you'll see hundreds of comments, and a good portion of them very often are how well he executed the ad read. Like his fans actually love how he integrates the advertiser, which is really unique to us. I don't see anyone with big scale doing that. And then the other thing is sponsorships, those fully 360 sponsorships that we build around our shows. And that's because our shows aren't just podcasts, because they are what we consider 360 franchises. There'll be merch, there'll be live shows, there'll be obviously the audio, but now also the video distribution on YouTube and across social. And so the brands that really invest as presenting sponsors or ongoing longer term sponsors of those brands, they capitalize on all of that distribution versus just having a read in the show. And I find that those dynamically inserted reads, while again, they can be very turnkey, very targetable, they also are more highly skippable. And so they just don't command the same premium that all that other stuff I just described. So our taking a critical look at that, I think, was really key. And then again, I think looking across the broader landscape of more traditional advertisers and telling the Barstool story, letting, really helping them understand how big we've become, how much brand love our fans have for us. Leveraging third-party resources like Nielsen and other third-party measuring companies to stack rank ourselves against the competitive set, because the brand marketers weren't hearing that story. There was an awesome team here before I came in that were very much a, self-taught bootstrapped sales organization, and they were doing a great job. But we really needed to kind of step up our game in terms of how we present ourselves to the broader brand marketing landscape and tell that story and find the brands that were the best fit for Barstool. And we've had a lot of success with that.
A couple revenue questions, which I don't know which you can answer and which are kind of more, what do they say, close to the vest? I don't even know that analogy. Sure. If there's any you're not comfortable answering, we won't answer and I'll just make up numbers and put them in later. If you can share like a rough percent or chunk of how much of your revenue comes from podcasting as a whole.
I'll just give as a percentage of our overall advertising revenue, because Barstool again has
that works. It doesn't need to be a decimal or anything.
We have a pay-per-view business with Rough and Rowdy and other ancillary businesses that generate revenue. But of just our sponsorship and advertising revenue, there was a point at which it was over half. And while the number continues to grow substantially, the percentage of overall revenue continues to decline. So what I mean to say there is our podcast revenue continues to grow rapidly, but we're growing in video and social and bringing on so much more than just the podcast audio revenue that we've grown the overall pie to be much larger than that.
Right. Yeah. There's so many parts of the pie, so many different types of pie. And then within podcasting advertising revenue, how does it kind of look compared to like the brands that you partner with for ad reads versus those that you do kind of full, like maybe they have their logo on the podcast cover artwork for those episodes, or maybe they're like the presenting sponsor for that episode. Is there like a kind of rough split you can share of what that looks like from podcast advertising revenue?
I don't know the split off the top of my head, I'll be honest, and I probably wouldn't share if I did, but
okay, we'll add.
Okay, but honestly, like
100 million.
It's not just the presenting sponsorships; it's really the partnerships that are more ongoing. While Pink Whitney is the presenting sponsor of Spit and Chiclets, there are other brands that are invested in that show for a longer period of time, doing more than just the podcast itself, that are beneficiaries of the value of a long-term partnership, and then for us are a bigger revenue driver. While they're not the presenting sponsor, like Budweiser and Bud Canada have also been a long-standing partner there. Across all of our shows, we have that tip of the spear presenting sponsor, and then we have a lot of other brands that either sponsor a segment or come in for a year-long investment and maybe sponsor a video series outside of the pod itself.
Well, if you play your cards right, I will mention Barstool Sports in this episode a couple times as well.
Love it.
Barstool Sports, Barstool Sports, Barstool Sports. See, I told you I'd do it. If you are interested in increasing the power of your brand through podcasting, it's a pretty cool medium, I have to say. If you're interested in doing that, but you know that it is nowhere near your best interest to spend all the time it takes behind the scenes to put an awesome podcast together, email me at max@maxpodcasting.com. I will help you save time with your high-quality podcast, take a huge load off your plate so you can focus on doing the things you love and focus on the rest of your business. Email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. Now, back to the mind of Deirdre. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's get to kind of more you on the individual or personal side, inspiration and creativity. When you think about kind of activities away from work that help you stay creative, I just read the question. What do you do to stay creative?
I've been fortunate to have, in a number of places I've worked, is access to the creators. And that line continues to get blurrier and blurrier. I mean, you're a creator, so that's inspiring.
Thank you. That's actually my middle name.
Whether it's, working with influencers and who just like did everything on their own and built up a brand and amassed huge following on the internet, whether that be YouTube or Instagram or otherwise. Now TikTok, obviously, huge platform for that. Being able to be close to that is really inspiring. And then also seeing that happening on the business to business side. One of the greatest examples of that here at Barstool would be Erica, right? She's the CEO of our company. She's running a huge business. She describes this place as like a circus or a goat rodeo. It really is. And she's got to keep everybody going in the same direction, working towards the same, objectives. And then she, in the midst of all of that, has become a content creator and launched the Token CEO brand and puts a lot of time and energy into that to make it a great brand and great show. So I find that all really inspiring and being able to be really close to that. I've had that again at a couple of different places I've been in recent years. I say looking back earlier in my career, there used to be this more church and state editorial versus sales and marketing and finance, essentially separation. I mean, ESPN was the epitome of it. We sat down in New York City, which is a place that makes sense to be for someone that's selling ESPN.com and otherwise. And all of the content and editorial was created up in Bristol. And at the time, and I hope this has changed, we weren't really welcomed up there. There was really no reason for me to go there other than to maybe give a tour. But I couldn't give a tour as I actually never went there. So I think, what I've seen in recent years is that the crossover between creator and business is a much closer thing. And I think for me, that's inspiring. And it's what keeps me going because every day I hear a different idea. And then I get to think about, well, that is a good idea. And here's who I think we could take that to from a brand perspective. So you get to be part of the creative thinking without being necessarily the creator or the creative.
Breaking down of the wall between the creators and what'd you refer to yourself as? The executives, the people who...
Yeah, or just the business folks, the business side.
The business side, yeah. It's a really beautiful thing. And here we are recording at the office and everybody is in the same building.
Yeah.
It's not like you got to take a train just to see oh, here's where the podcasters are or anything like that.
Yeah, we bring our partners in here too. We want them to see where, for lack of a better term, the sausage gets made, right? And they love coming.
All for sausage references.
Fortunately for us, a lot of our brand partners start out as advocates for the brand inside their organizations because they are also fans. That's where we tend to find the most success is when there's someone inside of a larger organization that really loves Barstool and wants to champion us to the other folks that maybe aren't as familiar. So they love to come here. They love to walk around, see the different studios. And then maybe they bump into Rhea and Fran in the hallway and they just get to say hello and see our talent walking around and being in the room and being so approachable and so relatable. And I think that's very unique to Barstool. There's actually nowhere I've been before where you just... maybe once in a while you are in the league office at MLB and, Harold Reynolds walks through the hall. But it's very different than here where you have a house of talent that are here day in and day out. Some here more than others. But every day there's a constant mix of interesting individuals here. One thing that I miss and is starting to happen is the guests are coming back. So similar to you and I are sitting here face to face. Well,
you're the guest, so
that's
you're
starting.
Back.
Yeah, I'm back. But, pro athletes and celebrities for a long time just, I think, more for PR reasons, of just kind of stay distant. Getting them back in the room, back in the building is something that I'm starting to see, and it's exciting.
And this is perhaps the worst segue I've ever made ever, but sausage making is a hobby. When you look at your hobbies, I mean, you mentioned running earlier. These days, is there any sort of hobby or arts and craft or anything in that space when you kind of completely unplug from work, if it's possible, that you find yourself enjoying?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier, I have two sons, both whom play a ton of sports. So, unfortunately, in some ways, my hobby is like on the weekends driving them from point A to point B. And during COVID times, not even being able to go inside the hockey rink and watch them play was pretty frustrating. But, I love what they're into in their sports. And one of the things I'm trying to do is like find ways that I can make my hobbies align with theirs so we can do things together, whether that be like playing tennis with them or getting into golf again, even though I took a lot of years off, trying to get them to play with me. Good luck to that. They're not buying into that sport right now, but it's what keeps me busy, and it's also what inspires me. So there's a lot of that. I'd say the only way to really unplug for me is to go to like a hot Bikram yoga class and like almost kill myself so I don't think about work, because this is a hard place to unplug from. It's just always on. And
well, there's just like an energy here. You just feel it, like when people are walking around or recording something. I'm sure people are walking by and like, oh my God, Deirdre and Max are in there. Can you believe it? But like,
yeah, there's all these people looking out in the door.
I heard
figure
footsteps
out what
earlier.
Are we doing in here right now?
Exactly. But there is a really, really cool energy. I imagine that it might be kind of tough to unplug here, but that's the whole point of an office and kind of having a separate place in the first place. Let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
And then we can work it into like an official Barstool podcast at some point, I'm sure. Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. This is where talk about a creative marketing campaign, an ad that you saw, and it could be just something over time that's really stood out to you. You were mentioning that Pepsi, something about the brand of Pepsi being a challenger brand, being in that space is something that really appeals to you, you find inspiring. Can you expand on that a little bit?
I thought of them because I read as recently as maybe yesterday, Pepsi just put up an outstanding earnings call where their net sales and revenue both grew over 20% from the previous quarter. That astounded me. I mean, this is a brand that, while they're a huge multinational corporate company, consider themselves a challenger brand. And their VP of marketing, Todd Kaplan, put up an old photo of the Pepsi challenge that I think was like from the 1980s, their campaign. I think they remember that because of the marathons my dad ran. They used to serve like Pepsi versus Diet Coke at the end of a marathon, which is bizarre actually when you think about it, but that's what runners drank. And now you have them, as this challenger brand, just looking for ways to be aligned to big moments in culture, whether that be the Super Bowl halftime show, and each year iterating on that and being culturally relevant. Shout out to them. They've done a lot of work with us. They have sponsored Dave's Pizza Reviews. They were the presenting sponsor of our Pro Football show last year when we brought on Deion Sanders. So I just find that they lean into things that are culturally relevant and will stand out because they're always overshadowed by their next and nearest competitor who outspends them by some astronomical exponential every year on the globe, and yet they've been able to have that kind of growth. And I think that's really exciting, and I think it's a David and Goliath story, which I love. A David and Goliath story. Look at Barstool, where it's come from, where it is, and still as big as we've become, we're always like, Dave in fact leads this, right, is always thinking about this brand as a challenger brand to the old guard established sports media and entertainment media, essentially. They were just a brand that when I read that question, it just jumped off the page at me what I was reading about their current results. Not necessarily a specific ad or a specific creative that they've put out, but just the overall body of their work and how they think of themselves as disruptive and challenging. I think a couple of years ago when we were in Atlanta for the Super Bowl, they were like, okay, here we are in Coca-Cola's backyard. What are we going to do? And they did a lot of like really edgy, disruptive things to stand out, and it kind of poked fun at the fact that they were in Coca-Cola Town, and Coke actually played back into it because it was like better to jump in on the joke than, be not in on it, I guess. So they're one that always jumps to mind for me when it comes to them not letting themselves get too big and bureaucratic. And even though I'm sure people inside there would say we are big and bureaucratic in a lot of ways, but from a brand marketing standpoint, they don't think of their brand that way.
And in the David and Goliath example, I hadn't thought about it this way before, but like Dave, poor Dave, is like literally named David, is like literally born into that mindset. I think probably keeping that mindset.
Well, he's fighting not only the sports media. He started out fighting the sports media. Now he's going after all the Goliaths. So
exactly.
Whether that be the financial services community, big CPG, when he launches his frozen pizza this year, we'll see how that does. But in general, Dave is the ultimate Dave versus Goliath story.
So on that note, let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Shoot.
Oh, shoot. All right, let's get wild. You mentioned Dave, who kind of blurred the line between talent and executive. I mean, he's obviously got kind of both sides to that, as do so many individuals here. Who is a talent or personality on the current roster that still like cracks you up every time you have a conversation with them?
Caleb Presley. He's like just naturally entertaining, such a authentic comedic spirit to the point where I'm not sure if he's joking or not half the time, but always a good one to run into. And he's not here as often as he used to be because he's down in Florida doing a lot of golf content. So every once in a while when he's around, he's fun to be around. But he's one of so many. I mean, this place is filled with just awesome, hilarious, talented individuals. And again, they're so approachable and relatable that it's hard to name just one, but I'll give Caleb the shout out because he calls me Miss Deirdre, and I always think that's funny too. I think that's why he stands out. It's like I'm his elementary school teacher from the South.
That is adorable. Does it get tough, like with so many amazing people and talent personalities around? Does it get kind of distracting? Like if you just have to walk to go to the bathroom or get water or something like that, you could. There's a number of people within the company as well as like pro athletes, as you mentioned, that you can run into at a given moment. That's just nuts. Yeah,
I mean, I think we all work really hard here at Barstool, whether you're on the sales team, whether you're a producer, whether you're on the talent side of things. Like, as much as it sounds like it's just a fun, free-for-all place to work, I mean, there are some days you come here and you're like, is anyone having any fun? Because it's really quiet. And, it ebbs and flows. Sure, when a big celebrity walks through the lobby, probably a lot of people kind of pick up their heads from their laptops and phones and
it's
kind
so
of
funny. That's exactly what I saw when I walked in today. It's crazy.
Yeah, that probably happened to you, I would imagine. But no, I mean, it's not distracting. It's almost like a nice element of the job, but we're working pretty intensely here. So,
and what is a weird talent or party trick that you have?
A weird party trick?
As opposed to a non-weird party trick. Just something like that doesn't impact your work at all, but it's just like you have a knack for it.
Oh, well, my best friend recently gave me these little cocktail napkins that say, I make wine disappear. So I think that's my superpower when it comes to parties. No, I don't do a lot of
Shout out Dana for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like the Dana beers of Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc.
We got Dana's on Dana's. And then living abroad. So you studied abroad in Spain, and then you like actually truly lived abroad in London, which again, London's like the key to my heart. But it could be from either of those two places, but what is like your single favorite memory or experience you had from abroad?
My second son, Macklin, was born in London. So the whole experience from beginning to end of, having another child and having him be born there is probably the most fun. In fact, every year still now here in the U.S., and we've been back since he was like 2 years old, so he doesn't really remember being there, but he knows that he was born there. So he likes to tell people he's British. So on St. Patrick's Day, I'm of Irish descent, so I'll try to encourage them to wear something green to school or something like that. He's like, Mom, I'm British. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to let you keep going on believing that.
Does he have an accent, though? Because I always wonder that.
I don't think he spoke a word there. He was only 2, so.
The language barrier's off the charts there.
Yeah.
And then what is a quirk you have? Maybe something about your personality. Maybe it's pronouncing the word personality. Maybe it's something about your personality that your kids or just family, friends, somebody calls you out for. It's a little bit quirky, but it's who you are.
I don't know how to answer this one.
There's no right answers. There's no wrong. There's no right or wrong answers.
It's funny. I'm like, in a weird way, super organized in some facets of my life and not others. So like where I'm always like running a minute or two late for every meeting. In fact, I realized today that my phone is 2 minutes faster than my laptop. It's just, I'm blaming my laptop on why I'm 2 minutes late for every unending, seemingly Zoom call.
I'm usually late, so this was like perfect.
Yeah. So that, like, while I'm always late, I'm also like the person who's like constantly like tidying things up and making things neat and going into the empty conference rooms and like pushing all the chairs around the table neatly because I want the place to look good. Barstool's a tough place because it's quite a messy environment. So I'm constantly trying to like shuffle papers together into a neat little pile.
You are my spirit animal. Deirdre, thank you so much. What's Caleb say? Miss Deirdre?
Miss Deirdre.
I won't say that. I'll keep it to him. But thank you so much.
Can't steal that one.
This has been incredible. Really, really appreciate you sharing the Barstool story, the Barstool revenue story, your personal story, dealing with my like sausage puns, which I don't even know how we got there. But really, really appreciate you coming on, being a couple minutes late. No, I'm just kidding.
You're never late for a podcast. This is on demand.
Exactly. Wow. You know your stuff. If somebody wanted to connect with you individually, is there a place they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is a really good way professionally. I'm a big believer in LinkedIn. I've told a lot of people since I came to Barstool, my LinkedIn has been almost unmanageable, but I still look at it every day and try to jump in on interesting connections. Also on Twitter @GanunLester and on Instagram at @DGanunLester. Not sure why those are different, but when I set them up, I didn't know anybody would want to follow. So
perfect.
But yeah, no, thank you, Max. This has been fun. It's great to meet you or see you again. And hopefully I'll see you get the next podcast movement down in Nashville in a few weeks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It comes full circle. And last thing here, final thoughts. It could be a quote, a line, whatever you want. Send us home here.
Can it be I make wine disappear? No, just kidding. I think for me it's just take risks. I tell everybody that if you're listening and you're in the business in any way, don't be afraid to take risks because with higher risks comes greater rewards.
And what a greater rewarding interview this was. Thank you so much, Deirdre, for sharing your tips, stories, advice, lessons. Just all things cool, Barstool, and awesome. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite app and tell a friend about the podcast. You can also find us on Good Pods. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at MaxPodcasting.com. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!